Hello, everyone. I'm Eliza, a developer community manager at OutSystems. Welcome to our first episode of Decoded Road to One, the start of a 3-episode series of technical sessions from OutSystems community members, which we're sharing as a little appetizer for the One conference in October. Before we jump into our talk today, please take a moment to register for One. We're going to have 5 different technical tracks and over 40 sessions. We're gathering in Amsterdam on October 15th and 16th, and we'd love to see you there. We will also have a little something extra for One attendees, free on-site certifications. We'll have a dedicated room equipped with everything you need for a successful exam. Testing spots are limited, so register and apply for yours soon. There are a few requirements, of course, so read over this slide for more information. The exams available include Associate Certification for ODC and Specialist Certification for Web Developer, Mobile Developer, Architecture, Security, and Front End. That is 6 exams to choose from. So again, head over to the One conference portal, register yourself for the exam, and book your certification so you can return home a certified OutSystems expert. Now that we're all registered, let's dig in. In today's session, we'll be learning about software testing. One of the most common reasons companies fail to maintain speed, quality, and innovation over time is the use of slow, error-prone UI tests that take too long to run and maintain. We're joined today by Brian Brink to show off his unique solution for testing OutSystems applications. Brian, welcome to the Road to One.
Thank you, Eliza.
Would you mind introducing yourself for a moment?
Yeah, my name is Brian van den Brink. I work for Valori as a chapter lead of OutSystems Testing. I live in Amsterdam, so for me the event is a match at home. Really looking forward to it. And what we basically focus on at Valori is only software testing. So we don't have any developers in our company, but we really specialize in automated testing and everything that comes with quality. And me and my team specifically focus on OutSystems testing. And today I want to showcase one of our solutions that we have for testing OutSystems applications. And I'm really looking forward to showcasing with a demo and really deep dive into our solution.
Sounds awesome. Okay, Brian, the stage is all yours.
Yeah, thank you. So today I want to talk about how we created a powerful testing strategy with increased speed and really showcase our solution with our testing tool and also what we think what really makes it special in this case. But first, the agenda for today. First, I want to briefly explain why Valori thinks we need a new testing strategy for our OutSystems customers. How we do this is that we really want to focus on the core layer of the application, and we'll showcase this with our own test tooling that we've created called Joseph. And it's a tool that we created on our own specifically for the OutSystems platform, and we'll show that in a live demo. So why do we need a new testing strategy? A few insights that we've had from the OutSystems state of the surveys that OutSystems done is that in many respondents, they say, for example, they believe spaghetti code is increasing, and also that low code results in some lower overall software quality. Well, there's some more things listed here on this page, and actually what it comes together is that there's a decrease in quality in some cases, but also that the delivery of the MVP apps or the delivery of the software is going much faster. So there's more delivered and also in a faster pace. This comes with also maybe that the junior developers vastly outnumber the senior developers. Backlogs are growing. And actually, with all this in mind, 45% did not yet adopt test automation. So we think these are some of the examples that we think why testing is more important than ever to really maintain the quality of the software and to really be able to deliver to the promise that OutSystems also provides, like deliver software fast in a good manner with high quality. And yeah, testing is really a big part of keeping up to that promise. A few things that we come across in OutSystems project is that we see very often that there's multiple system integrators, multiple OutSystems partners working at customers. Often we see that a testing role is not defined, and also that the test tooling that is used in the organization is not specifically made for the low-code organization that OutSystems brings. So often there's high-code test tooling in place instead of low-code test tooling, for example. And what we then ask is quality assurance really an independent role in the company? What we also see is on a cultural aspect is that we often hear is that testing is the bottleneck. So development goes really fast with OutSystems. We're really able to keep a high frequency of change to really adapt to the changes that are needed. But in the end, then when it comes to testing, that's still a slower process that basically is the bottleneck of a release. And when these things are mentioned, we really ask ourselves, is quality a team responsibility, or is it maybe the party of the testers alone? And do we really achieve the optimal velocity that we could have if we bring everything together? And the last part that we often see is the architecture part, that it's often said that testing layers below the user interface is very difficult. So testers rely on user interface testing or maybe even manual testing instead of being able to test APIs or even units. And there's often many dependencies between the logic that is built and the data that is needed to execute that logic. The last part is that often the systems integrate with many other external systems or even internal systems. So this together asks the question, are we following the correct testing strategy related to these challenges? If we zoom a bit further in, I think this slide perfectly explains why we think sometimes testing becomes the bottleneck of innovation. Is that, let's say you have a few sprints of work, you have 4 sprints of work, and the green blocks here are the sprints that you're working on. So that's the innovation part of your system. And then the gray areas are basically the things that you've built before. So if you're in the second sprint, you'll have to also retest the work that's been done in the first sprint, etc., etc. And you can imagine if you're working for 4 sprints, it's still all fine because these 3 sprints of works, you can still maintain it, you can still keep an eye on them, etc. But at some point, the work is going to expand, and in the 10th sprint, it's going to be very difficult to be able to keep up with all the work that you've done before and make sure that everything is good in terms of quality. So what we say is that if you want to be able to keep innovating, if you want to be able to work on new things all the time, you definitely need to think about automated testing, because otherwise there's no way you can keep up with your regression testing. Another thing is that if you're not doing this automatically, it's probably the case that you're not going to test all the risks that you actually want to test because you basically have no time for that. So we think if you have a lack of test automation in your projects, it actually frustrates the innovation over time. Another thing that I've mentioned is that it's often very difficult to test layers below the user interface. And what we often see in our projects is that most of the automated tests are either on the UI level, or there's no automated testing at all, and people are just doing it manually, maybe with the help of the business to just go through the scenarios by hand. This also results in very long regression timeframes because the user interface testing are the slowest type of automated tests. And also, of course, manual testing is very time consuming. It also, another result of this is that you're focusing on the wrong things. So you're only focusing on the user interface, but not actually specifically on the logic that is on the lower levels of the application. And because of that, developers and testers are not aligned, because mostly developers are working in the business logic. They're building their code on a different level than just the UI layer. And if you're not testing further than that, the discussion is also on a different level. I think it's very important to look at the platform's capabilities here and see how can we use the platform to really dive into these lower levels of the code and really test all the dependencies that we might have in lower levels and make sure that we have our testing strategy at the right area of the system. So that's why we say we should focus on the core layer of the application. I think the core layer, the word says it all. It's the core of the application. That's where most of the important risks are covered. And yeah, the business logic of the application should also be the heart of your automated testing strategy. And what we say is that we should use the OutSystems APIs that are generated by the platform. And I'll show you a bit further on in the demo how that exactly works. But basically what happens is if OutSystems is executing business logic from a screen, in the end, it communicates with the server through APIs. And we should really focus on testing that layer of the application and be able to test basically our user journeys in a sense through APIs. And I'll show that in the demo at the end of this presentation. And what this concept is using is actually the OutSystems architecture canvas that is used for software development and architecting our applications. So first we have the end user layer where the user interface is at and where the user interacts with. It's basically where you will build your UI tests on. Then we have the core layer, which basically has all the business concepts, the entities, all the business logic around this. And at the end, we also have our services, our foundation layer with reusable assets that are at the lowest level of the application. And actually what happens if, for example, a user interacts with the system and they fill in a form or they press a button or something like this, what the platform will do for us is that it will actually trigger communication that is encrypted by APIs. And it can show data or it can execute server-side logic, but it does that through the client actions at the end user layer. And actually what we want to focus on is how can we interact with that communication and really use our test tooling to go in between these layers and make sure that we can test the logic that we need. So we call this core layer testing, and that's really I think we are very unique in this solution by being able to provide tooling that can interact with this part of the system. We've successfully decrypted the out-of-the-box APIs that the OutSystems platform generates. And this means that we can test the business logic and the data that is fetched for the screens. So we can also test, for example, the representation in a table or anything that is displayed from the database on the screens. We can test that through APIs. And that means that we can bypass all the slower and error-prone UI tests, and we can really focus on the logic layer of the system. We no longer need to build APIs for testing business logic, which is a big win. In this case, the developers will not need to build APIs to expose this logic, but we can actually use what the OutSystems platform is generating for us. And by doing so, we can actually test all the actions that the front end is using to the end users. This also includes aggregates and data actions, for example. So we can actually bypass, again, the UI tests for this, and we can test the overview tables, maybe even drop-down values in forms and all kinds of things that are generated in that sense. We can test it as such. So how does this look in a bit of more overview is that we're using, again, the architecture canvas concepts, and we're actually doing component tests through APIs. So we're testing the public server actions that are referenced by client actions. We're testing the screen aggregates and the data actions that are on the screen as well. By this, I think we focus on the most important business logic. So generally, the higher level end-to-end or integration tests at API level, they represent the business logic actions of the application that are referenced by the end user layer. And if we look, okay, what levels of testing do we then have, is that at the top level, we still have our UI tests. So we might still want to decide for some cases, we want to test the end-to-end flow of the user interface. And that will still be a UI test like we did before. Then we have the screen data that used to be a UI test as well, because that was the only entrance to this kind of data representation. But actually what we find out is that also these aggregates are in the backend calls to the server to fetch data from the database. So with this new solution, we're able to test it as a feature-focused test in this case, or a unit test by an API. And similarly, by testing the forms on a screen, like the users might interact with the application to fill in some data. They press on a save button, and that save button often triggers business logic to validate the form that is filled in. This will also be available to us as an API test, and we call it more of a higher level integration test because multiple server actions are probably combined in that business logic. So we want to test them sort of as an integration test between units. Then we have the core concepts, which are not referenced directly to the end user layer. So they're not available as the same type of API as I've talked about earlier. But in this case, if there's some core concepts that are really risky or we really want to test them separately, we'll still have to create a test API around this to make sure that we can also test that as well. And similarly, if we have API tests from the foundation layer or anything around this, we'll have to expose it in some way if we want to test the concepts by themselves, or if they're just an exposed REST service or a consumed service, we can always test them just like normal APIs. In the end, this middle part it's a big part of the tests that we're doing, and they're all available to us now as a core layer test, which I will showcase in the demo. And also something important to keep in mind is that the higher up we are in the flow, or at least the more dependencies that we might have in terms of data, or if we're testing business logic actions, there might be dependencies of other core concepts of other server actions. So we do have to keep in mind in terms of preparation of the tests, what kind of data do we need, what kind of dependencies do we have to be able to test it as such. But that's that didn't change in terms of the testing approach. So again, something important to keep in mind, if there's still important concepts that are not called by the front end, then we'll create these test APIs for them, but only for the commonly reused core concepts that are really higher risks in that sense. Otherwise, we might as well just test them through the BL layer, since at some point they will be referenced by those actions. And maybe at some point, we also want to add some additional GET APIs to fetch some specific test data from the database that we might need to cover some of the dependencies that we have in terms of data. So I think it's a very good idea to just demo the solutions, because there's I think it shows better when we can show the test itself. And for this demo, we will use the tool that I've mentioned earlier that we created at Valori, which is a test automation tool that is tailor-made for OutSystems apps. It's a low-code tool, and it's based on Selenium. We've basically built a low-code around it to not include too much programming that is necessary to create the scripts. And also for API testing, it can be used. And in that sense, it uses a REST assured framework to be able to test APIs as well. So let's get started with the demo. This is Joseph. And basically what we see here is the interface to build the test cases. On the left-hand side, we see the different aspects of the tool. So we have test cases. We can also work with BDD or Gherkin in feature and step definitions. Pages and objects is basically the area where we can build reusable modules or reusable blocks for our tests. We have the API modeling that we can do, query modeling that's basically for testing databases, data storage for test data, and playbooks for running tests, for example, in a CI/CD pipeline. That's basically a suite of test cases that we can run. So let's quickly move to our application to see what we're going to test for this demo. Is that I've prepared a little wizard where we have all kinds of questions asked, and depending on the answer that you've providing, it's going to come with calculating the power level of the user. So let's see if we run through these steps, what the results will be. And for this, we're just going to have to look at what is happening on the core layer of the application. So again, if we would test this in a normal way, we might want to decide to just automate the UI. We want to click some buttons, we click next, and we go through the process. But instead, actually, if we look what's happening under the hood, what I've mentioned in the presentation as well, is that if we would click on, for example, this button, go next, then we see here that the action that is actually triggered by the platform is logged in the network traffic as well. And in the end, what this actually does, it's an API. So we have an endpoint here, which is the name of my action and my environment of the application. It has a request and it has a response. And here we can see already that after this first step, that my power level is increased to some extent. So if you want to automate this wizard, what actually is happening in the application is, instead of that we have some logic at the UI layer, we see things happening on the server side as well. And that's what we want to focus on in our tests, because instead of automating the UI, we want to focus on these services. So how do we do this? If we switch back to our tool, let's just start with a new test case. I've already prepared some things to go through later, but let's just go through it step by step. I've just created a test case, and here we have our test case editor. On the right-hand side, we have all our actions for the UI. So maybe if you want to test UI with an input field, you want to have a keyboard action. If you want to click something, you have a mouse actions. You can verify things, etc. Apart from the web browser, we also have API call actions that basically can extract headers from the response, or it can verify nodes. We can extract nodes, all kinds of actions that you might want to have against the response of an API. But also something interesting that you can see here is that we have the OutSystems React actions. And here we have the OutSystems API that is used to reference business logic. We have a way to log in because we need an active session to be able to interact with these APIs. And we have some other things that we need. Just for the purpose of this demo, I've already prepared some actions to reuse. So for example, I call this the action pack that we have for testing out systems, is that we have already predefined some of the actions that you want to do in this case. So for example, what we have here is the login. I've prepared that for the application, and also the requests, like a happy flow request or things like that. So let's just start with logging in, because we need to. And it will ask me for a username and password, and I can just use the environment variables that I have in Joseph, and the same for the password. So that's just a predefined block that I can use to log in. And underwater, Joseph will make sure that we have the correct session, that it connects to the correct application with everything that's needed to set up the session. And the next step will be to call the API that we have. And I'll do that first with the base action to show a bit more about how it works. What it will need from us is a path and a request body. And I can fetch that from the network traffic in the browser. So I have the header here, and the path of my action will be this part. So everything excluding the base URL. I can copy this and paste it in Joseph. And the same actually for the request body. I can get it from the request payload and copy it as such. Here I need to just paste it here and make it in a pretty print. For now, just these module versions and API versions, that is also something that is catered for by logging into Joseph and setting up the session. So Joseph makes sure that it is using the correct versions. And that's actually something very important, because if you don't do this, yeah, it might be that after a new deployment, the API version or the module version is changed. So that is something we needed to put into Joseph to take care of us for us, because otherwise you'll have to maintain your tests all the time. But in this case, Joseph takes care of you for that, so that's fine. Here we have the identifier of the question that we have, a base level that we can provide, and the input that we provide as well. So that's something we'll come back to later. Let's paste that in Joseph. And here, actually, this is the steps that's needed to be able to execute this action. And let's just see what happens if we run this. Let me quickly also call a verify node value to be able to validate against the response of the API. In this case, let's again look at the interface here, and we see the response. So this is the response body, and I know, okay, I want to validate against the attribute power level. So let's do that. I'll do that by just doing it like this, and I say 2000. Let's see what happens when I do this. And I run it. And here it was successful. It says 2000 is equal to 2000. If I would change this, as you can imagine, it should give an error. So let's hope it does. And here it says expected 2005, but it was 2000. So what is actually nice against this approach is that by using this network traffic of the application, we're really able to also know, okay, what do we actually want to test? Because it's pointing us towards the correct logic. So if I reset this and I actually clean my network tab and go through the complete flow, then actually we see all kinds of steps. This is a different action. This is a different action. So we see these things popping up. And actually what the wizard is doing, it's asking all kinds of questions about things that maybe if you're a more sporty person or not. And it's calculating as such what our power level is going to be. So you can imagine if you want to test this, you actually want to go through the whole flow and see what the end result of a certain set of choices is. So if I sometimes choose this answer and maybe this answer, it's gonna calculate differently. So let's see maybe if we combine these steps a bit further, how we want to go around this. Because instead of hard coding all these values, we also, of course, want to make sure that we can use the same module for multiple test cases. So instead of having hard-coded integer input 2 or hard-coded base level, we want to make sure that we parameterize it as such so that we can reuse it for different scenarios. I've prepared that already a little in another test case, which is actually this flow, where we have all the different steps. So again, we log in. We have, in this case, the different questions in the flow. And every time that we've answered a question, we fetch the power level that is returned from the response. We put that as the base level of the next question so that it continues with the answer from the previous question. And what you also see here is that we have parameterized the input for every question. That is something very important. That is a next step that we can take in our test case, is that we have a data-driven option. And actually, I've prepared 3 different scenarios. One where our power level will be under 9,000, one that will be exactly 9,000, and one that, of course, will be over 9,000. So we have different sets of answers, and depending on what kind of answers that we provide, it will calculate, in this case, these expected results. Well, and that is some sort of integration test on an API level, but what we're actually doing is replicating the user flow of the UI, because we exactly do what the traffic, we actually mimic the traffic that the actions on the front end is generating. So we're actually doing a user-based, like a test on API level, and that really helps us to speed up. So first, let's see if we run one of these actions, what it looks like. So let's just start with this one and say, let's run this set of actions. And then it will go step by step. It will validate and go through this whole flow. And in the end, it will validate the expected result. Now, and as you can imagine, this is just one example, but you can, of course, have many different answer options or different sets of combinations. And yeah, you can just expand in that sense with the rows, because what it actually does is that all the rows in this sheet are actually a separate test case. You will see if I run two of these tests that actually it first finishes this one, and then it starts again for the second row, etc., etc. Yeah, and I think the powerful thing is here that, like, again, you're able as a user to really go to the system and see what is happening on the back end in terms of logic. We see different types of actions being triggered, and we can actually go around them like that. And because you're able to fetch this behavior from the front end, it's really easy to know what type of test you want to perform with what type of data, because everything is basically visible by just going through the system, and it helps you generating the data needed. Of course, this is still a relatively easy example, but it works for everything because that's basically just how OutSystems works. If you're providing input, you're putting a submit action, or you're providing something to the server, this will be the traffic that you will see in the backend. And then at some point, if you've decided, okay, I've tested this specific action on all possible combinations, this specific action on all possible combinations, that is actually the first step that you want to do, because we want to first focus on the specific actions themselves. So that's also why I've prepared, for example, here a test specifically focusing the age step. So I log in, I have the happy flow for age, and let's just first test all the different combinations for age. Then what I just do is I copy this action, I copy the request body, and I start testing with different inputs. So I want to parameterize this input. Let's copy this. Then I know there's 3 different types of answers. And if I go back to the application, I know that it's less than 15, between 20 and 35, or 35 years old, for example. So what I could do, I create a data-driven test, which would be age. And I can say my first flow would use under 15. Oop. My second flow will be 25 or 30 years old. And the last one would be 45 years old. And then the age will have to correspond with this. And I have an expected result that depends on the answer provided. So let's just fill them in quickly. First, I'm 12, and the expected result, well, let's just see what happens. But for this, I could, for example, go into OutSystems and see what is actually there in the logic. So here I have age, and depending on what type of what age you are, if you're like this, minus 1,000, the middle one is plus 2,000, and the other one is plus 500. Very easy, but just as an example. So I think this would be minus 1,000. This would be plus 2,000, I believe. And this one would be 500. And then I put this information in the action like this. So I have the integer input looking at data age. And then I want to validate the response, verify node value, which again is the power level. And that is validating against the expected result. So let's see what happens if I run this. Fingers crossed. This one goes wrong. Ah, okay. Wrong expectation. Let's see what's happening. So now they're all good. I'm wondering if it's correct, but let's check that. So there's now 500, 200, 2000, and 500 as a result. If I look in the code, I think I expect something different. Well, that is actually a reason to maybe dig into it a bit further. But I guess the idea is clear that we should validate against the expected results that we actually have. And maybe in this case, there's something wrong. So I think we can do this for all the different steps. And what we would first do is verify all the combinations that we might have on a specific question. If there's something wrong, there's also a reason to maybe question if my expectation is matching what is built, and if my expectation is matching what is actually designed. So there's always a question, of course, in terms of findings, but let's not dive into that for now. Of course, the demo effect. And then at some point you decide, okay, all the different aspects of the modules, they're working fine. We're going to build an end-to-end test on the API level, which will still be a very fast test. And then the final step would be to, okay, we have verified everything on a logic level, but we also want to make sure that actually the screen is interacting correctly. And that will be your end-to-end test on the highest level on the UI. And that's something I've also prepared, where we actually, instead of making all the different steps through APIs, we actually click through the system like that. So now let's try to run these tests on the front end and use it as a UI test and really go through the wizard from a user's perspective as well. First, Joseph opens the application, and then it will have to log in. And then the next step would be go through the wizard with the different questions that it will ask.
Vegeta, what does the scouter say about his power level? It's over 9,000! What, 9,000? There's no way that can be right!
And that's it. Our power level is over 9,000. And I think this showcases very nicely that the difference between a UI test and an API test, that it has much more dependencies in terms of clicking, maybe you have to wait because of the next step is not there yet, and all these dependencies, these are bypassed by actually testing the business logic directly. But in the end, if we look at what we've talked about in terms of the tests that we have the end-to-end test on the highest level, but also we have some sort of component test / unit test on the specific function to verify against the age. We can do the same for all the different questions and make specific test cases for that. Because, for example, if there's something changed in this question, or maybe an expected result is changing, then we can really pinpoint our test to that specific function. But of course, what is most important at some point is that it should work together. And we can test with the integrated APIs. We can test them as such and make sure that we test all the different steps of the wizard by using our API actions that we have in our tool. I think that brings together all the different aspects of the application, and we can really, in this case, focus on the most important risks that we see and test all the necessary levels that we might want to test, without the need of expanding in terms of UI tests and these slower tests, but we can really pinpoint the faster type of tests. I think this is a good example of the approach. And of course, if you have in the real world more difficult scenarios with more data dependencies, what that will require from the tester is to make sure that you prepare your test case as well. So you have preconditions to fetch data, maybe to input in these APIs. And we might have post conditions to clean up our data as well. But in the end, the basic process will remain the same. So we have these requests and responses from our business logic, and we work with that from there on. In the end, what we can do is we have a playbook with our different test cases, and what it might do is we have the different end-to-end cases on the API level, and we can regularly run them and make sure that everything is working fine. So I think that is what I wanted to show today. Thank you for listening, and thank you for taking the time to dive a bit more into the testing world of the OutSystems platform. If you have any more questions, please reach out to Valori or me, or meet me at the conference in Amsterdam in October. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan. That was so illuminating. Now, would you mind if I asked you a couple questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. So the first one, how do you see this testing approach help in shifting left as a tester towards developers?
Yeah, I think that is really something important that we focus on with this solution, is that we notice that it's very important as testers to have that dialogue with the developers. And I think because we really focus on the logic and really that helps us talking the same language as the developer. So we're more close to their type of work, and they come a bit closer to us because, yeah, we're starting to talk the same language here, and that's really helpful, I think.
Nice. One more. Can we include these test results in a CI/CD pipeline in other tools like Jenkins?
Yeah. So Joseph has an integration possibility basically on the command line interface. So any tool that we can, we've had many clients where we work with Azure DevOps or tools like that, and it's very easy to line things up. Joseph is available like that through the command line interface. So most of the time it's easy to do.
Amazing. Okay, so this is the last one. Other than the extremely convenient location, what are you most excited for at One?
It's always nice because I remember very well I think it was 2022 where we had the last time we were in Amsterdam for the conference. And it's always very nice to see all the OutSystems community together. It was I think a very big party at that time. So I'm just looking forward to seeing everybody and talking more about the challenges everybody has in terms of testing maybe. So yeah, just looking forward to meeting up.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to meeting you in person for the first time in Amsterdam at One.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for our episode 1 of Decoded Road to One. We be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to see our next Road to One episode, elevating performance with well-designed databases and optimization techniques. Now, I haven't done this before, so bear with me, but I believe the subscribe button is right down here that you can click. And that's it. So see you all next time, and thank you all for joining us. Bye.